Hello, Mage fans, and welcome to Mage the podcast that works hard towards Ascension so you don't have to. I'm your host, Adam, and today I am interviewing someone who, let's just say, knows a few things about Mage the Ascension. Satyros Brucato has been contributing to the game since the year Mage started. He was developer for the majority of the first two editions. He wrote for Revised Edition and was developer for a large part of Mage 20, authoring several of the core books. I am pleased to have him as my guest today as we talk about Forbidden and Forgotten Orders, which just came out. Satyros, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Adam. I appreciate it. I'm good. Just turned 60, which is about 20 years longer than I'd expected to live. So at this point, I figure I'm in the bonus round and just finishing up a project for another friend and have a huge backlog on my whiteboard, my office wall of projects I can't wait to get started on once I'm done with this one. So,
well, I'm going to ask about those at the end of the episode because I want to hear about that too. But for now, Satyros wrote the introduction and the chapter on the Solificati for Forbidden and Forgotten Orders. The introduction gives us extensive metaplot options regarding the Disparate Alliance, a group that brings 10 crafts plus orphan mages together. With strength in numbers and a wealth of arcane knowledge to draw from, the crafts are ready to stand up to the technocracy, the Nefandi, and even the traditions. The introduction goes on to mention crafts that remained independent and explain the three tiers of the Alliance, the Forerunners, Middlers, and the Outsiders. Satyros, which independent crafts do you think would be the most interesting to add to a mage story?
Well, depending on who you are and where you want to take the story, my votes on that one would be the Bata'a. I'm partial to the Solificati, the Hollow ones, as always, and the Alibatine. That being said, it really depends on what people want from their game, what they can bring to it, and especially because so many of the disparate groups are culturally based. It really depends a lot on the interest and the knowledge and the grounding that a person has in a particular culture as to whether or not they want to bring them along. I love the Bata'a. I would completely screw it up if I tried to run them as the focus of a game, because that's not my culture and not my background.
Well, when I look at the Solificati in the Book of Crafts from 1996, I see names like Wade Racine, Aaron Anderson, and Kevin Andrew Murphy. Before we started recording, you mentioned Bill Bridges played a part in the creation. Can you tell us how the Solificati got started?
Sure. So at the very beginning, Mage First Edition basically did not have a metaplot. There are these 9 traditions plus this kind of demi-tradition called the Hollow Ones. There are these 5 conventions. There's this technocracy, and then there are these other folks called the Nefandian Marauders. And basically, the metaplot for Mage First Edition was the traditions are saving magic. The technocracy wants to destroy it. And that's largely it. So when I was hired, one of the first things that I did was figure out where did all these groups come from? Why is it that these traditions share common ground, they share protocols, they share rank titles, which seem really, really strange when you start talking about a dream speaker acolyte or a verbena chantry. These culturally did not make any sense. So with my brainstorming core group, we started puzzling out a whole backstory to make it make sense. Also, you're dealing with groups like the virtual adepts and the Sons of Ether. And I'm like, well, obviously those groups don't go back centuries and centuries and centuries. You're not going to have, 14th century computer mages. So what did you have? Part of that process, because there was that whole common ground between the 9 traditions, I came up with the idea of the Council of 9. Said when they came about, why they came about, where did the technocracy come from? Well, obviously they weren't calling themselves the technocracy in the 13 or 1400s. What were they? They were the Order of Reason. Who were the Order of Reason? What sort of groups were in the Order of Reason? And with my brainstorming group, which that was Bill Bridges, Kathleen Ryan, Brian Campbell, quote unquote owl going back, turns out not his real name, Judith McLaughlin, Libby Miller, Sam Chupp, Travis Williams, Darren McKeeman, basically started hammering out how to take this fantastically ambitious idea and give it a realistic, real-world related framework. Fortunately, I'm a history geek, and I've been interested in occult history in particular since my teens. So we basically started throwing in this doesn't fit here, this doesn't fit here, but if we do it like this, it fits like this, and so forth. the pieces of that fell together in the Book of Shadows, which is basically Mage 1.5, which came out in 1994. Yeah, 94. In the course of all of that, Bill had coined the term in the group, the Solificati, as the shining ones, or crowned ones, or rather they were being the basis for the Sons of Ether. And later, when it was coming up with other groups, because obviously Mage first says there are lots of other traditions. We don't know what they are, but there are lots of them. And I said, as we were doing all of this stuff, I was also going both to the in-house folks and to freelancers. We need to bring in other magical cultural traditions. We need Arabic mages. We need Chinese mages. We need Indian mages. We need, African mages. We need to know what those groups are, because we had an extraordinarily limited talent pool at that point, and you couldn't go on social media and find, an Asian writer to write the Wulong. There were definitely missteps along the way. But someone who did know what he was talking about was Kevin Andrew Murphy. And Kevin had some really ambitious ideas about where to take Mage. Some of them worked, some of them didn't. But one of the ones that did work was his idea of an alchemical tradition. I combined his idea of the Children of Knowledge with Bill's idea of the Solificati, and basically said, well, what if we built this contention between the modern day, Children of Knowledge and the Renaissance era Solificati, the flashpoint of that being Hillel in the Fragile Path, which, was my Rashomon Mage style, laying the backstory. And partly because of that, partly because of just stuff that we came up with along the way, and partly because in alchemical terms, putrefaction is part of the process of alchemy. Folks, think of alchemy as turn lead into gold. Well, that's just a metaphor. It's also the sales tactic that alchemists use to get people to finance their research. But the ideals behind alchemy are not about refining materials, they're about refining yourself. And so I said, in the course of refining yourself, you go through these various different stages where the self breaks down and it becomes a new self, and that breaks down, that becomes a new self, and again, putrefaction, breaking down, the transmutation, those are fundamental elements of alchemy, so I made them fundamental parts of the group as well.
That helps me understand how the different people come into the picture. So, yeah, I did not know that. It's really interesting. The history section of your chapter in Forbidden and Forgotten Orders is brief. After reading, I asked, is that all? It just breezes through things. But every good wizard practices subtlety. I stopped to think for a moment, and it hit me. This section is dense with names and terms, just perfect for casual web searches. Anyone who wants more can search the terms. Anyone who doesn't can quickly move on. Clever 21st century writing technique. Did I get that right?
Thank you. Yes, I tend to write dense, multi-layered stuff anyway. Even stuff that comes across apparently, let's say superficial is wrong. There's the surface, and then there's what's going on under the surface. Then there are the inside jokes, inside references, plays on words, and particularly with books like Power Chords or Red Shoes, my book Power Chords, Music, Magic, Urban Fantasy, or my novel Red Shoes, there's what's going on the surface, and then there are all of these layers of, again, internal references, cross-references, and so forth. And the cat in the hat there, narrator, almost every paragraph in that is loaded with cross-references, inside jokes, plays on words, and so forth. Because I figured that's how an alchemist, especially a 21st alchemist, would speak, would explain it to you. Because alchemy is, and this is, she goes into it in the chapter, alchemy is the language of metaphor. It's not about hard and fast truths. It's about a surface presentation that falls away to reveal a deeper layer. And that if you understand where the layers are going, then you are transformed, ideally. And that's what she was going for. And that's how she explains it. And that's how I wrote it.
Okay. Now, the original 1996 Book of Crafts seemed to describe a group that had the old guard and the new generation. They were sort of moving in different directions. After reading this book, I get the impression that the old guard found a comfortable home in the Order of Hermes, and the newer generation is the craft that we know of as the Solificati. Is that about right?
Yeah, that's about right. Basically, when I stepped off of Mage in the late 90s and Jess took over, Jess was basically handed marching orders from sales and marketing. And part of those marching orders involved paring Mage down and getting rid of the groups that were confusing. And so Jess was told, take this group, wipe this group out, fold the survivors into this group. Take this group, wipe them out, fold the survivors into this group. And that's what happened with the Solificati joining the Order of Hermes. When I came around to doing Mage 20, and part of the design process with Mage 20 was, as Rich Thomas and I said when we were first talking about it, we wanted a Mage for all Mage fans. We wanted to end the edition wars. We wanted it so that if somebody loved Revised, there was stuff for Revised. If they loved First Edition, there were references and stuff for First Edition, Second Edition, and so forth. Rather than making it either cut and paste regurgitation of 90s stuff or taking one particular side and saying this is the actual metaplot, everything else is wrong, I went with the basically choose your own reality from approach from Mage the Sorcerer's Crusade. Did the Future Fates thing where it said you could take your game here or you could take your game over here. Maybe this happened or maybe it happened this way, maybe it happened this way. Part of what I wanted to do is I wanted to bring back the crafts. Partly because I felt offended that someone had told Jess, you have to basically genocide this entire cultural group and fold them into this little group and genocide this group and genocide this group. Jess wasn't happy with that. Bill wasn't happy with that. And I wasn't happy with that. So I was like, fuck it, I'm going to bring them back. And that's where Rochelle Udall and I brainstormed up, say, how do we bring them back in a way that works for the 21st century? That brainstorming process involved talking with Hiromi Kota, with James Sobrano, and again, Rochelle with Dina McKinney, who was the original creator of the Sisters of Hippolyta, with my friends Adonis and Callie and Adelante, to make sure that this time around the Hippolytoi actually came across as Greek. Basically, we've talked to a whole bunch of people and figured out where are we going to go with this group now, in the 21st century, how can we fix the things that we got wrong in the 90s and bring all the groups, but especially the crafts forward, and how can I make this make sense so that rather than having and here's a bunch of crafts, going, okay, let's put a framework to that. And that's where the Disparate Alliance came from. And I said, well, considering that Mage 20 is about survival, because that's what it is. It's about Mage 20 is about surviving reality wars. And I said, well, these disparate groups kind of looked at each other and looked at all the stuff that was going on both in the real world and in the Mage metaplot and said, fuck it, we got to stick together. And that's where they stick together. They come together despite some really significant differences. They manage to make it work, which is, the way diplomacy works in real life anyway. And in the course of doing that, we figured out, okay, how, in order to function in a group with people like the Taftani and the Bata'a, how is this group going to have to change to fit that? And the old traditionalists, they're hanging out with the Order of Hermes. The new visionaries are going, no, we're moving forward, because alchemy is also about moving forward, as is Mage.
Well, the Solificati have been in the Order of Reason, the Traditions, and now the Disparate Alliance. The point of view character speaks of membership in the Alliance as a temporary thing. Do you think the Solificati are wary of working together with other Mage factions, or was it more an expectation that all things are going to change anyways?
Both. I mean, there's nobody in the Disparate Alliance who thinks the Disparate Alliance is going to hang together forever. They all expect that it's not going to hold together. It's an alliance of convenience, which is also why the groups who were talked about in the introduction didn't make it, because for whatever reason they weren't even suitable for an alliance of convenience.
So the chapter gave me the impression the Solificati see the Disparate Alliance as a way to network and gain allies. I didn't see any specific projects that we're focusing on. Is that a proper understanding, or is there more to it?
Oh, no, that's all I had the words count for. I had 5,000 words to write all that stuff in. There was only so much you can do in 5,000 words.
There's a mention of Solificati and Hollow Ones getting along because of mutual interest. Do you see any other friendships in the Alliance? Would the Wulung interest in alchemy bring them together? Would the Ali Batin interest in subtlety and metaphors make them friends?
Yeah. Well, and especially, I mean, alchemy that's an Arabic word anyway, so it makes sense. Not only that the Ali Batin and the Batini and the Taftani would generally get along with the Solificati, but also you got a whole tie-in there with the Nagoma, which pass along the Egyptian roots and African roots of alchemy. Check out Minister Faust's novel, The Alchemists of Kush, which I think I referenced in that chapter. I'm not sure. I know I've referenced it in various different Mage books. Excellent book. Minister Faust is one of my favorite writers, and his work is very, very Mage and very suitable, especially for 21st century Mage and inspirational for 21st century Mage. So yeah, it makes sense that those groups would get along.
Okay, I'll have to drop that note in the show notes, the book reference, I mean. So what groups in the Disparate Alliance would be potential opponents for the Solificati?
The Templars, for starters. The Templars, and this is, I haven't had a chance to read the Templar chapter yet, but the way that Rochelle and I envisioned the Templars, and you see this in her adventures of Brother Theodore in the Mage Cookbook, which Rochelle wrote as a combination of recipes and metaplot. The Templars are kind of going, well, the Lord wants us to get along with these people for right now, and it's kind of suiting our purpose right now, and we've done this before in our history right now, and it's bit us in the ass before, so we're just going to kind of hope that we don't wind up with another broadsword in our back next time, but I'm watching you. And the Solificati, because of their changeable nature, are one of the ones that the Templars are really, really watching.
I didn't think of that at first when I was reading the chapter, but it makes sense. Well, you took time at the end of the chapter to help players get a handle on alchemy in the game, both in terms of what the character would use and game rules. Were you frustrated by not being able to go into greater depth?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I could have made that chapter twice as long easily.
Solificati use alchemy to prepare effects ahead of time. Compared to other mages, do you think they have a disadvantage with spur-of-the-moment magic?
It depends on what they've prepared. I look at the Solificati kind of like Batman, always making a plan ahead of time.
That's pretty darn cool. I can't top that. So if you had 10 more pages to add to this chapter, what would you prioritize?
I would have made more. I would have put in more history. I mean, it's just because the real life history of alchemy and where it ties in with the psychonauts of the 20th and 21st centuries, transhumanism. I mean, I could have gone into a whole thing about transhumanism and alchemy. Probably would have put in more club culture, but I would have written more about how the various ways in which different forms of alchemy work. I mean, Taoist alchemy is not Egyptian alchemy, is not medieval European Christian alchemy, is not Kabbalistic alchemy. There are similarities, there are ties. And I look at the Solificati as basically take the ingredients from here and take the ingredients from here and take the ingredients from here and shake them up and see what results. But I would have liked to have gone more into that. There's a section on using alchemy as a practice and the instruments of that practice in chapter 10 of Mage 20. And that goes into a little bit of that. There was a point where I was contemplating doing like the book of practice and having like 10,000 words each on all the different practices and how all the details fit together. And I was like, one, I will go absolutely batshit crazy pants if I try and develop this book because the research alone will be enormous. And two, when you look at real life metaphysical practices, if you ask 3 practitioners, you'll get 6 different answers. So everybody would argue with everything, and it's like it's like that line from Star Wars of Princess Leia: the more you tighten your grip, the more systems slip through your fingers. That's very true of metaphysical practices.
We turn now to some listener questions. Nicholas asks, where can we find a better handle on alchemy, the idea of drinking something and getting a magic effect from it?
Well, like I said, the Alchemists of Kush is a really good start. I'm trying to... Part of it is just I have this, and you who are listening to this can't see the massive bookshelves full of books, but I have tons of books on metaphysical practices and magical practices and occult history and stuff like that. And I find it hard to just think of one or two to go check this out. Not Timothy Leary. Why am I blanking? Huxley. Aldous Huxley's Doors of Perception and the Heaven and Hell and the Doors of Perception. That book was incredibly influential on my writing on Cult of Ecstasy, but it's also very, it's also a kind of a primer, and on many levels historically was a flashpoint for the 20th century psychedelic revolution. Kevin Andrew Murphy would probably have a much better list of references than I would, because he's just an encyclopedic brain, which I don't. I tend to have a very eclectic brain where I'm constantly, that scene in Watchmen when Ozymandias is hovering in the room with all the TV screens, and he's going, I see this because I look at this, and I look at this, and I look at this, and I look, and so I draw this conclusion. That's the way I work, not just professionally. That's the way I live. And so I have a hard time going, this particular book right here will tell you this thing, because the ideas that I have come from many, many different sources, half of which I can't even remember.
Okay.
But I do recommend The Alchemists of Kush and Doors of Perception.
TL Webb asks, many mages have mixed feelings about their practice being promoted in popular fiction. Do the Solificati capitalize on the social boost that properties like Full Metal Alchemist provide, or do they hate the dilution of their beliefs?
Oh, I think the majority of them get a kick out of it.
Yeah, as long get people talking, and the smart ones will come looking for us, is I guess the basic thinking there.
Yeah, well, it's basically, and that was one of Kevin's ideas with the Children of Knowledge back in the Book of Crafts, was they are people who are trying to get people to open their minds and expand their consciousness, not who are trying to lock everything behind closed doors. That's what the technocracy wants to do. While the Order of Hermes is very much of the you must be this tall to ride this ride, the Solificati are very much like, here, drink this, drop this, tell me what you see, are about expanding horizons rather than restricting them.
Haylong asks, mage traditions are each complicated and deep enough to be their own game line. Solificati are no exception. How do you think through prioritizing the balance of a worldview concept, lore dump, game mechanics, and rotes in 10 pages? Seems like trying to tell your life story in a fortune cookie.
Yes. Yes.
Very succinct. Well, as we come to the end of the episode, I would like to hear more about some of these projects you're working on now, the ones at least that you can tell us about. You got my interest up at the end of the episode, and now I can hear more about it.
Well, I'm finishing up on a book for S5E, which is a superhero line, done in 5th edition for, I believe it's Pinnacle, but that's called RuneGate Shattered Paradise, which is a setting source book filled with new classes, new beasties, new setting, and my usual political commentary. I worked on that one with my friend Joey Coyote Wallace. Talk about another reference here. Check out Joey's book, which published under Coyote Wallace, American Mystic, the life, death, and rebirth of Jimmy Wonderful. Fucking great book, very Mage, because it was very inspired by Mage. But Joey does a great job of encapsulating that whole psychotropic reality mindfuck thing very well in that book. But he was a collaborator on RuneGate as well. I have a book coming up from Nightmare Press later this year. It's a collection of short stories called Breaking the Devil's Bread. And I have several projects that I can't really talk about much because they're in various different pieces scattered along my virtual workbench. But one of them that I can talk about is The Forever Bridge, which is at least the working title for a dark fantasy novella that I'm about halfway through at this point. That will probably also be coming out through Nightmare Press, hopefully later this year. There's a paranormal romance, Dream Along the Edge, which I'm planning on releasing a standalone edition of that. It's been published twice before by various publishers. And then I am hoping, knock, 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 before the end of the year to complete Creatures, Storms, and Aliens, which is a collection of mini games that I have written for various different sources, some for my Patreon, some for benefits, some on Game Jams. But that includes games like Singles Going Steady, which is a dating game inspired by music titles. Love Beyond Walls, which was published in the anthology Love and Resistance a few years ago. Wilderlost, Storm Season, Creatures of the Woods, Creatures of the Dark. And if all goes well, which at this point in this year, who the hell knows what's going to go how, but I'm hoping to have that one done by later this year. And that will be, we'll know more about that later. There is also currently have my novel Red Shoes, which is an urban fantasy novel. It's been out for about 2 years. It's out there. And my other collection of short fiction, which is Valhalla with a Twist of Leith, also available. Both Red Shoes and Valhalla are available in basically any major bookseller. And then there's other stuff, but we can't talk about that yet.
Well, then we'll have to leave that for next time. Well, thanks so much for taking time out of your day to talk to us Mage fans and tell us more about this great book that's just come out. And was there any final words you had for our listeners before we wrap up today?
Thank you. Thank you, Adam. Thank everybody involved with Mage the podcast, including Terry. Rest to you, man. And thank you to all the listeners. Thank you to all the Mage fans. Nobody, and I've said this on previous episodes, nobody figured that people would still even know what Mage or Mage the Ascension or World of Darkness were going to be 30 years later, much less people being fans of it, people having grown up on it. And so I really appreciate it. I want to say thank you to all of you for keeping Mage alive.
And that is a big thanks to our executive producers also, who are not only helping us to keep doing this, but they are giving us ideas and pushing us to do more for the Mage community so that we can grow it, make it more fun, and make it appeal to more people. Well, thanks for taking the time today. I really do appreciate it, and I think that's about it.
Thank you, too. Take care. Have a good one, Adam. And take care, everybody.
If you have something to say, please contact us at magethepodcast@gmail.com with your questions, comments, or feedback. Subscribe to Mage the Podcast on iTunes, Google Play, TuneIn, and other aggregators. If you like the show, others might like it too, and if you leave a review of Mage the Podcast, it makes us more visible in their searches. You can follow us on Blue Sky, Mastodon, and Threads. The links are in the show notes. We're also on the web at magethepodcast.com. You can listen to past episodes there and see the complete show notes. We have a YouTube channel now where you can find our episodes. There's a link in the show notes, but you can also search YouTube for Mage the Podcast. You'll find us. This episode was assisted greatly by our executive producers, and I want to thank them now. Oracle Derek Semsick, Oracle Jason Vines, Oracle Droncap, Oracle Ben Bandelo, Oracle Sean Gallagher, Oracle The Crew of Erebus, Oracle McHale, Oracle Puka G, Oracle Christopher Phillips, Oracle Guy Stewart, Oracle Buck Gregory, Oracle Bad Company, Oracle Spartacus, Archmaster Andrew Edelstein, Archmaster Berto, Archmaster Brad of the Blue, Archmaster Dan Svensson, Archmaster Jeff Waugh, Archmaster Leroy Bryce, Archmaster Morgan Aaron, Archmaster Simon Strand, Archmaster Wolf Larison, Morris Hopkins, Jervis Johnson, EBG, George Lara, Will Vincent, Shartan, Kevin Fitzpatrick, Tyler Bryan, Jason Duncan, Sev Nessus, Bubba the Pale One, Henry Kraft, Eric Schwenk, Starfish, Ambiversion, Ryan Stray, Lulls and Stuff, Kathleen Halperin, Kelric, Alexia, Patrick McNamara, Blaze Hibbert, Rachel Grace, Daniel Scribner, Ricardo, Rob H., Alex, Nikita Klaimanov, Leslie Weatherstone, Matthew Prohl, Anders S., Bryce Perry, Michael Parker, Jeremy Z., Melissa Krause, Ian Robertson, Curtis Hendricks, That's Real Nito, Sig, Manuel Canoas, Darren Hennessy, Eli Levenger, David Rowe, Jason Kennedy, Samuel Tobin, Nabero, Dennis Osborne, Jenna F., Chris Kinner, Gray Trilug H., Daniel Cuppen, Ryan Kendi, Ia Bull, Stefan Carton. If you would like to become an executive producer for Mage the Podcast, it would help us keep producing episodes like this one. You would also become a part of our own council to discuss upcoming projects. The link in the show notes will get you started. Well, thanks everyone for listening. Until next time, truth until paradox, baby.